hasn't done like things entirely right, like you mentioned, like the negative trends. Is there like a country that has done right that we can kind of look for in terms of successfully implementing the kind of policies you're suggesting?
It's a good question. I'm not sure at the moment. Like, I don't think there's any data that's come out that has shown. I mean, a lot of the places that have legalized it's been fairly recent, and so I think the argument would be that potentially Canada could be that country to kind of do things differently. I mean, we were the first country to we passed the first opium act, right? We did it before the United States. We were the kind of vanguard of the anti-drug movement, and it makes sense that now we could be at the front of the legalization movement. It is a good question. I don't have an answer because I don't know.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
Jim?
This is for Kate and David. Do you have any evidence that would suggest that the humanists that you're talking about would have been elevated by cannabis?
I think not. They like their wine, but I think that's probably as close as we can get.
Yeah, no, there's no references that I've encountered to smoking intoxicants. A lot of wine, what might be stories in the ancient Greek context of people getting sort of hallucinogenic off some fumes coming out of the ground in certain places at the like the foothills of mountains, but that's about it. That's it.
What was the husband's reaction to the botanical work of their wives?
Yeah,
Of these two in particular, or more generally?
it's a really good question. So something that I didn't really have time to put into the presentation in the way that I'd like to normally talking about these people is the degree to which these women in these circles are just like unbelievably exceptionally privileged in so many ways. There's things that they're fighting against and limitations placed upon them by their gender, but at the same time there's a huge amount of privilege. And one of those is having, in Mary Delaney's case, not so much her father and her first husband, but a second husband who's very congenial to her work, who they're friends for a long time before they get married. One of the reasons that he loves her is her work. And in the Duchess of Portland's case, coming from a legacy of several generations of men who really supported their daughters and female relatives' educations and made this possible for her. And then a marriage to a man, which if you're an aristocratic woman and you really don't get a choice in the 18th century, sort of the best thing possible happens to her, which is just to marry a guy who just seems to be pretty nice and pretty boring. And he just sort of lets her get on with it, really. And yeah, sort of steps back, and both of them with the other women in this circle can, yeah, just sort of pursue what they're really interested in. But that is, as I said, a exceptionally privileged and rare position for them to be in.
Question for David. Like a lot of harsh language in them, and then kind of like echoes, everything from poets in the 19th century, like threatening each other, dueling and killing each other, to like musicians nowadays, like getting in these feuds, like diss tracks and like killing each other. Were there situations, especially in this very volatile sort of context, where people took it beyond words, where they like literally killed each other over words, or was it like all just like a game of words, basically?
I can't think of an instance where like a social murder actually took place over poetry. Poets were certainly killed by power for things that they wrote, but a feud going so far as actually killing, because there are big questions about the aggression that's depicted in these poems, how authentic it was and how performative it is. There's a long strand in scholarship that insists that Catullus versus Furius and Aurelius were just like bitter enemies. Obviously those people get into a lot of trouble with trying to explain the last one that I showed you, where like all of a sudden they're very good friends. Yeah, the extent to which the aggression and the violence that's being depicted there is authentic and honest, or its poetic persona and public performance is kind of an open question. Yeah, the only instances of people genuinely suffering over over poetry as cases where someone offended somebody in power, like an emperor or a king. There's a lot of social murder took place in this period of time over political speeches, election campaigns were very murdery places in the late Republic. But that's all prose, not poetry. So.
Just for Kate, and I don't know if you mentioned this, how long did Mary Delaney take to do one of her pieces on average?
Yeah, so it's about 10 years for 1,000. That's kind of, it's not exactly 1,000 and it's not exactly 10 years. But it's sort of concentrated around certain times of the year when the plants would be available just because of the growing systems. A lot of these were plants that she was looking at in their alive or very recently alive state rather than drawing from, for example, other people's artwork or from dried specimens or something like that. So it sort of concentrates at the time of the year when those specimens would be available to her in these gardens.
So she would have to do it like while it's still fresh, so she had to do it really quickly.
Yeah, so to spring and summer. So the Duchess had these amazing, huge gardens at Bulstrode Park with all these exotic specimens from what are called exotic specimens from other parts of the world, and then they also went out and collected these local specimens that then she would use for the pieces. As she kind of became famous for making these, other people started bringing her plants. And so she then kind of starts like sourcing them in as well. But I'm not sure exactly how fast. It seems like at her most productive, you know, it's kind of like day after day sort of getting through them pretty quickly.
Like with little pieces?
Yes, yeah, little tiny scissors, like scissors like this.
Okay.
Tiny scissors, yeah.
Right.
Kate, following up on that, can you tell us more about why she chose to do the paperwork at this time? Scientific illustration was booming, and there was an interest in creating either these intense ideal types through drawing or intensely specific examples of the plants.
Yeah.
And they're very different drawings than what she's producing, so what is she after by using paper?
It's a really good question, and I don't have a completely authoritative answer for you. I'm really interested in the same question. I think that a large part of what she's after is that personal connection. That in so many of these you see, as I pointed out, with the leaf and then matching it to this letter, and as I said, I can't be sure exactly, but you see these kind of resonances between other things in her life that are connected to the plant and to then the artwork she's producing. There's also, as I said, one of the things that she was really skilled in was paperwork. And she's credited as inventing the paper mosaic thing, but it's really tied to this history of, what gets called paperwork, which is all these cut silhouettes, sort of lanterns, friendship albums of sort of friendship collage albums. There's this fad for screen making, which is cutting up prints and making them into these sort of decorative screens. Charles Dickens did a lot of that, which is a fun fact. So it's absolutely in that kind of tradition of that sort of, kind of high status for a woman art type, I think, as well.
Julie?
Yeah, Luscombe, David. You told me that late Imperial Roman history and I guess literature becomes shady, difficult to, it's not as sure secure as the late Republican and Imperial history. When we were talking about the emperors and stuff, I was wondering, can you trace the cultural shift in morals regarding sexuality? Is it Christianity that changed everything, or migrations? What happened?
I mean, there's a history of scholarship on that. It remains a bit of a vexed question. Scholarship on masculinity in the late antique period is a relatively recent phenomenon. Really, only one person has started looking at the late imperial period. Just started a few years ago, and one book has come up on that subject. So it's difficult to do from the perspective of the things that I work on. Definitely, I mean, there's a strand in scholarship going back to a book by a guy named John Boswell called Christianity, Social Tolerance, and Homosexuality, the CSTH in sexuality studies, that that basically attempted that hypothesis, that not at the beginning, but like into a more sort of mature Christianity is when morals began to change. I mean, Boswell argued that the early church was actually fairly comfortable with same-sex desire, even the extent of claiming at one point that some very early church documents depict marriage rights that were only to be used by, between members of the same sex. Others disagree with his interpretation of those documents. So yeah, I mean, there's certainly some people do associate the rise of what we understand as a restrictive sexual culture with the rise of the church. But again, as I say, there's all sorts of extreme social controls over sexual behavior in earlier periods. They just take different forms, are very much repressive, just in different ways. So that shift is something that happens sort of liminally between the end of classics and the beginning of medieval studies, and so no one really knows whose job it is to study it, which is an interesting phenomenon. So yeah, not something that's easy to answer, although what you suggest is a hypothesis that has been advanced quite enthusiastically by some people.
We have time for one more question. Okay, fine, two. Okay, Adrian.
No, go ahead.
Okay, Dan?
So for Alex, you mentioned that legalization doesn't mean lawless, and that a whole bunch of new laws are added, and sometimes they have negative effects, at least in some regions or for some age groups. An example is that there was an increase in incarceration for younger offenders of certain ethnicities.
Arrest,
Arrest.
Arrest, yeah.
Is there something that prevents the removal of all laws related to marijuana, or?
No, I think the point is that, you know, you probably need to have those laws. The point is that legalization doesn't really make the cause of the disparities go away, right? And you can see that. So if you legalize and pass these new laws, the same kind of racialized practices like racial profiling are still there. And so enforcing these new laws about using underage and stuff is still going to generate those same disparities. So really, the solution wouldn't be to legalize without new laws. It would be to legalize with the new laws, but also address those deeper issues within police departments that drive them to target some groups more than others and so on, right? Yeah. Does that answer it?
Perfect. Well, let's thank our speakers once again. Turn over to my co-chair Adrian, who will.
Oh, the next theme?
Yes.
Alright. Prior to that, I was gonna make like a question about like growth because I wanted to make a penis pun. But like cultivate. I was talking about cultivation, but I like the growth thing better. Last JFLS topic, which is in March something.
Yes.
Is we're gonna bring it back home to Toronto. The Vest and classic Drake album. If you're reading this, it's too late. So as the last one, I think that would be a great theme. But if anyone's interested, let me know. We'll be soliciting speakers soon.
All right, sweet. Thank you so much, and see you then.